Hey, this is Dave DeCamp from antiwar.com. This is anti-war news for Monday, October 27th, 2025. All right, the first story at the top of antiwar.com today. The U.S. sends a carrier strike group near Venezuela. So the U.S. military is deploying an aircraft carrier to the waters near South America as the Trump administration continues its military buildup in the Caribbean and its push toward war with Venezuela. So Sean Parnell, who is a U.S. War Department spokesman, wrote on X on Friday that the USS Gerald Ford and its strike group, which includes 5 destroyers, will be heading to U.S. Southern Command's area of responsibility. You see this picture here. This was taken on October 1st when the Gerald Ford was off Gibraltar. It is currently, its last deployment was in the Mediterranean. It's still in the Mediterranean. According to a ship tracker, as of Sunday, it was off the coast of Croatia in the Adriatic Sea. So once it starts heading to South America, it'll take about a week for it to get there. So there could still be some time before this thing actually gets in position. But this is a huge increase in firepower that the U.S. is going to have in the Caribbean, where it's conducting this bombing campaign against these little boats, which you don't need an aircraft carrier. You don't need much to be doing what they're doing now, considering that these small boats they're bombing are completely defenseless. But this signals that they are preparing for a big bombing campaign potentially in Venezuela. It could also be part of the psychological operation against Maduro and Venezuela. But if you remember earlier this year when the U.S. was conducting a very heavy bombing campaign in Yemen, it was primarily U.S. fighter jets, taking off from aircraft carriers that were launching the strikes, as well as other warships that were firing Tomahawk missiles into Yemen. And so they're positioned for something similar with Venezuela once this aircraft carrier gets to town. And I mean, how did that go for them in Yemen? What did that accomplish? But this is again, we're really just barreling towards this big war. We've seen the other provocations, the bomber flights. Also, another thing that happened this weekend. On Sunday, a U.S. Navy destroyer arrived in Trinidad for joint exercises right near the coast of Venezuela. And on Friday, Pete Hegseth, the war secretary, announced the 10th U.S. airstrike against a boat that he claimed was carrying drugs. And of course, the Pentagon has provided no evidence to back up these claims that it's making about these boats. They're not providing any information about the people that they're killing. We're just supposed to take their word for it. They're using the label narco-terrorist to justify what are extrajudicial executions at sea. And according to the numbers released by the Trump administration, they've killed at least 43 people this way. And look at this statement here from Hegseth. This is what he says when he's announcing this strike. Quote, "If you are a narco-terrorist smuggling drugs in our hemisphere, we will treat you like we treat Al-Qaeda. Day or night, we will map your networks, track your people, hunt you down, and kill you," end quote. So citing the war on terror when he's talking about this new war. Just the war on terror is not over, by the way. I mean, a lot of people might think it is, but obviously, if you watch this show, you read antiwar.com, we're bombing Somalia at a record pace. There's also the occasional U.S. airstrike in Syria and Iraq. And so, it's what they call the endless wars that continue. And this is what Hegseth seems to be promising here. So I'm going to I'll save this stuff for the next story because I think this is a very important piece of reporting here. Inside Marco Rubio's push for regime change in Venezuela. So this is an article published by Drop Site News on Friday. It was written by Ryan Grimm, Sagar, and Jetty from Breaking Points, and Jack Paulson. And just what some sources in the Trump administration told them about some of the claims that they're making to justify this bombing campaign and this push toward regime change. So U.S. intelligence has assessed that little to none of the fentanyl trafficked to the United States is being produced in Venezuela, despite recent claims from the Trump administration. A senior U.S. official directly familiar with the matter tells DropSite. So again, if you've been following me, you're aware that they're trying to justify this bombing campaign push for regime change by pointing to the overdose deaths in the U.S., but that's primarily caused by fentanyl and other opioids, which just don't come from Venezuela. And that's more, this report is reaffirming that point. So the official noted that many of the boats targeted for strikes by the Trump administration do not even have the requisite gasoline or motor capacity to reach U.S. waters, dramatically undercutting claims by Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth. The claim is backed up by recent comments made by Senator Rand Paul, who similarly noted that zero fentanyl is produced in Venezuela. Despite the lack of intelligence linking Venezuela with fentanyl production, the Trump administration has made alleged Venezuelan drug trafficking the casus belli in its drive to overthrow the government of Nicolas Maduro. On Thursday, President Trump referred to possible ground action, claiming at a press conference that the sea drugs coming in are 5% of what they were a year ago. So now they're coming in by land. The land is going to be next, he said, indicating he was willing to bypass congressional approval. On Friday, the U.S. announced that it's sending an aircraft carrier to the area. So, and another thing, when he's saying by land, he said, the boats, they're not going to keep bringing things by sea. They're going to come by land now. So if they start bombing Venezuela, claiming that there's drug shipments by land going to the U.S., because the allegation, like the real allegations against Venezuela, are that it's a big transit territory for cocaine that's produced mainly in neighboring Colombia. There, according to the reports, there's some cocaine production on the border, in the border area in Venezuela, but for the most part, it's the cocaine that's shipped through Venezuela comes from Colombia. So are they going to be claiming that the cocaine goes from Colombia to Venezuela, and then they're going to send it back through Colombia up to Mexico to get it to the U.S.? So it just goes to show how thin and weak their case is here. And kind of just we're being lied to in so many different ways about this. So two sources familiar with discussions at the White House note that Secretary of State Marco Rubio, a longtime proponent of regime change in Venezuela, has been the driving force behind the aggressive military and rhetorical posture toward the Maduro regime. Toward that end, Secretary Rubio is also in charge of the remnants of the U.S. Agency for International Development, has redirected millions of dollars in money previously allocated for pro-democracy measures in Venezuela and the surrounding countries, a thinly veiled effort to prep the region for war. Rubio cycled through multiple arguments for regime change in Venezuela during the early months of the administration, largely based around human rights and election concerns, which were unconvincing to Trump. After assuming a position on the National Security Council in the spring, Rubio then presented a new argument to Trump that Maduro was a narco-terrorist drug trafficker based on a 2020 indictment by the Department of Justice under the first Trump administration over alleged cocaine trafficking. The official noted that Trump's personal distaste for drugs and a campaign pledge to use the U.S. military against Mexican drug cartels as an important impetus for Trump greenlighting recent strikes. With Trump unable so far to carry out attacks on Mexican cartels, strikes seen as politically untenable, Rubio effectively steered his gaze to Maduro. The potential of access to Venezuela's vast oil resources made the argument that much easier. Rubio's policy was most recently at a crossroads after Maduro offered to turn over those oil resources to the U.S. in exchange for a cessation of hostilities. Trump acknowledged the offer in a recent appearance, saying that Maduro offered everything. Do you know why? Because he doesn't want to F around with the United States. Trump rejected the offer after being swayed by arguments from Rubio that the best way to secure Venezuela's oil reserves was to facilitate regime change in Venezuela and make a better deal with a new government, the sources said. A recent U.S. government assessment of Venezuelan oil exports to China found nearly 500,000 barrels a day, a small fraction of the country's total capacity, which Trump is turning down in the immediate term. So kind of interesting here what they're saying about how Rubio convinced Trump. And that's a point I've been trying to make, is that I know a lot of people on the MAGA right, kind of the MAGA base, do support the idea of military action against cartels, which I think is misguided. But the fact is that that's not what this is about. This is about this push toward regime change. And I think this report makes that very clear, with Rubio kind of shifting his arguments in favor of, turning up the pressure on Venezuela and Maduro. All right, so the next one here, the U.S. sanctions Colombia's president amid boat strikes. Spat, So the Trump administration announced on Friday that it was imposing sanctions on Colombian President Gustavo Petro amid a spat between the Colombian leader and President Trump over the U.S. bombing campaign against boats in Latin America. In a statement on the sanctions, U.S. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent accused Petro of allowing drug cartels to flourish and refusing to stop the activity of the cartels, allegations the Colombian president denied. So Petro said in response, quote, "Fighting drug trafficking for decades and doing so effectively has brought me this measure from the government of the very society we help so much to curb its cocaine consumption," end quote. So the U.S. sanctions also targeted Petro's eldest son, his wife, and Colombia's interior minister, who also denied these allegations. And the U.S. and Colombia have a very long history of military cooperation, longtime allies and partners. Recently, Colombia in 2022 was declared a major non-NATO ally. So the U.S. sanctioning their president seems pretty significant. At the same time, Petro has one more year, less than a year left in his term, which ends in August 2026. And then under Colombia's laws, he cannot run for another term. So depending on who wins the next election, that could change things when it comes to the U.S.-Colombia relationship. But how is this going to affect things, when it comes to the cooperation? Trump says that he cut off aid to Colombia. Not really sure if that has actually happened. You never really know with those announcements Trump makes. But, how much is this going to affect the U.S. and Colombian military cooperation, especially with this threat of a major war right next to Colombia looming, which Petro has made clear he is very, very opposed to the U.S. trying to do a regime change in Venezuela. All right, so the next one here, Israel launched Gaza airstrike with U.S. approval. So Israel launched an airstrike in Gaza on Saturday after notifying the U.S. and getting approval to launch the attack, the Israeli news site Ynet has reported. The Israeli military launched a strike in the Nusayrat refugee camp in central Gaza, claiming that it targeted a member of Palestinian Islamic Jihad, or PIJ, who was planning an attack on the IDF, a claim that PIJ strongly denied. So PIJ said in a statement that the claim that its military wing, the Al-Quds Brigades, was preparing an attack was a purely false claim and fabrication through which the occupation seeks to justify its aggression and violation of the ceasefire. So important to point out here that Palestinian Islamic Jihad, like Hamas, supports the ceasefire deal. So I don't think they have much motive at this point to be planning attacks on IDF troops. And again, this was in the Nusayrat refugee camp, away from where IDF troops are. So, what could this guy have been really doing here? And the strike wounded 4 Palestinians, according to the Al-Awda hospital. And the Ynet report said that the alleged PIJ operative who was targeted was wounded and not killed. According to Israeli sources, the strike came after Israel passed intelligence to the U.S., and the attack was only launched after coordination with U.S. Central Command, which included notifying the head of CENTCOM, Admiral Brad Cooper, who you can see here in this picture. This is from last week when J.D. Vance was in Israel, setting up this U.S. military outpost in southern Israel that's overseeing the ceasefire deal. And U.S. Middle East envoy Steve Witkoff was also briefed on this strike, according to the Israeli media reports. And the attack marked the first time, again, according to these reports, this is the first time that Israel and the U.S. used a new mechanism under the ceasefire to coordinate on military action in Gaza under the ceasefire deal. Hamas, which, of course, is a signatory to the ceasefire deal, called the Israeli strike a clear violation of the agreement. And in response to the report and criticism of the U.S.-Israel relationship, Israeli officials said that they were coordinating with the U.S., but insisted that Israel does not need approval to bomb Gaza. According to Wafa, the Palestinian news agency, Israel also launched a drone strike on Friday that killed 2 Palestinians, and there's no sign that Israel coordinated with the U.S. on this particular attack. Gaza's health ministry said on Sunday that Israeli forces have killed at least 93 Palestinians in Gaza since the ceasefire went into effect, including 4 who were killed over the previous 48 hours. So they've continued to kill people inside Gaza. Now, with the blessing of the U.S. here, and it just goes to show how one-sided having the U.S. as like the monitor, the overseer of the ceasefire. It's going to be a very one-sided thing here. All right, so the next one here, Israel is backing 4 anti-Hamas militias in IDF-controlled Gaza. So Israel is backing 4 militias that plan to fight against Hamas and are currently operating under the watch of the IDF in the Israeli-controlled part of Gaza. And this was reported by Sky News on Saturday. So Hossam al-Astel, the leader of one of the groups based in southern Gaza, said that all 4 groups are part of a coordinated effort to take over Gaza. He said, quote, "We are all for the new Gaza. Soon we will achieve full control of the Gaza Strip, and we will gather under one umbrella," end quote. So the term New Gaza has been previously used by Jared Kushner, who, of course, has been very involved in the negotiations and everything. So he used the term New Gaza when discussing the reconstruction, which I covered in the last show, this plan that the U.S. is considering to split Gaza into 2, Israeli-controlled and Hamas-controlled, and only allow reconstruction in the part that's controlled by Israel. So this is what Kushner said about that. He said, quote, "There are considerations happening now in the area that the IDF controls, as long as that can be secured, to start the construction as a new Gaza in order to give the Palestinians living in Gaza a place to go, a place to get jobs, and a place to live," end quote. So the largest group that Israel is backing here, the largest one of these militias, is a gang led by Yasser Abu Shabab, who is known for looting aid trucks. In 2024, according to the UN, his group was the most responsible for looting aid trucks in southern Gaza. In an interview with the Washington Post, he actually admitted to looting aid trucks. He said, yes, we take from the trucks. He claimed that they weren't taking food at the time, but he admitted to looting the trucks. And then this is the guy that Israel arms. And then they use the claims of Hamas looting, stealing all the aid to justify a total starvation blockade on Gaza. But so Abu Shabab and some members of the Abu Shabab gang have ties to ISIS. So this is the main, they control territory in southern Gaza under the watch of the IDF. And a senior commander in the Abu Shabab gang said that the group has between 500 and 700 fighters and that Israel has been allowing them to smuggle cash, weapons, and vehicles into Gaza. So Al-Astal, the leader of the other militia, said that his militia has acquired a large number of Hamas weapons from the black market in Gaza and also receives supplies, including ammunition, from abroad. He said the group also receives a weekly delivery of everyday items to support civilians living in the camp. And he's claiming that the militias have backing from Western states and Arab countries. He's also claiming that the Palestinian authorities involved, that they just can't admit it now. The Palestinian authorities previously denied that it's tied to any of these militias. And then there's 2 other militias based in northern Gaza. And so this guy, Al-Astal, who is speaking to Sky News and leads one of these groups, he said that he was in prison before October 7th and that he was able to break out. He says his story is that he was in prison, that Hamas threw him in jail after claiming that he was involved in a plot to kill a Hamas official, which he says he was not involved in. But he was in prison. He said 2 months after October 7th, they broke the doors down and escaped. So I believe Abu Shabab was also a former prisoner, and he was accused of drug trafficking. So these are the people that Israel is backing, and I think this is, going to be a big part of their strategy here, is to kind of stoke this inner Palestinian conflict within Gaza to maintain control. All right, so the next one here, Ben Gvir says the IDF should shoot children near the yellow line. So Israeli Minister of National Security Itamar Ben Gvir suggested that the Israeli military should shoot Palestinian children in Gaza who approach the so-called yellow line, which is the barrier that separates now. Well, it's not I shouldn't say barrier because it's not a real barrier, but it's the line that Israeli troops withdrew to under the ceasefire deal. They had to go behind this line that was drawn on a map. And so Ben Gvir says any children who walk in there should be shot. So according to Israeli media, he made the comments during a recent security cabinet meeting. How the conversation went was that a military official who attended the meeting said that the IDF's policy is to shoot any adults who cross the line and arrest a child with a donkey. So they're saying any adults, doesn't matter who they are, shoot them, kill them. If we see a child and a donkey, we'll arrest them. In response, Ben Gvir said, why not shoot a child with a donkey? And he also urged the Israeli military to shoot children and donkeys too, saying that Israel must stop being merciful. And another Israeli official in the meeting then asked who should be shot first, the child or the donkey? And then Israeli Defense Minister Israel Katz concluded the conversation by saying, quote, anyone who approaches the fence should know that they may be harmed, end quote. So he said the fence, but again, this is a line that, when the ceasefire first went into effect, it was not marked at all. The Israeli military has said that they started to mark it with big concrete blocks that are yellow and 200 meters apart from each other, which even that, if you don't have like the line of sight, you could easily miss that. But when the ceasefire first went into effect and people were going back to Gaza City and trying to go back to where their homes were, to the ruins of their homes, they didn't know where this line was, and there was several instances, at least, a few dozen of people were killed for allegedly crossing this line. And we've seen this, there's been report after report in Israeli media that in Gaza, the IDF would set a line, an arbitrary line, and if Palestinians crossed it, they would be shot. They would create these kill zones. And the people on the ground, the Palestinians, didn't know where the line was. I mean, we just had recently Haaretz, the Israeli newspaper, spoke with an Israeli soldier who said in northern Gaza they would set up every morning when people were trying to get aid from aid trucks, and they would set a line, and if anybody crossed it while they were waiting for aid, they would shoot them. And he said he killed many people, including children, doing this. So the fact that somehow the U.S. can go on supporting this military, it's just really shameful stuff. All right, so the next one here, Netanyahu says Israel will decide on international forces in Gaza. So Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said on Sunday that Israel would determine which international forces would be deployed to Gaza under the ceasefire deal. The Israeli leader made the comments in the context of the growing criticism of the U.S.-Israel relationship and questions within Israel about how much influence and control the U.S. has over future plans for Gaza. So Netanyahu said, quote, we control our own security, and we have also made clear regarding international forces that Israel will determine which forces are unacceptable to us. That is how we act and will continue to act, end quote. And he says that the U.S. is happy with this, has accepted this. And the Gaza ceasefire proposal that was released by the White House calls for an international stabilization force, and the idea is that once this force is assembled, then they could take over territory that the IDF withdraws from. Also, though, that has to coincide with Israel being happy with the disarmament of Hamas, which that is not happening anytime soon. So there's just so many, we don't know how this is going to go, but they're trying to raise this international force, that at least the U.S. is, to go into Gaza. At the moment, it doesn't seem like they're getting any takers. Trump is claiming that there's all these countries willing to go in and fight Hamas, but the reporting says the opposite. And it looks like the Arab countries that initially were kind of imagined to be involved in this, Saudi Arabia, the UAE, are not anywhere near this at the moment. The countries that are being floated now include Egypt, Indonesia, Azerbaijan, and now Pakistan is apparently being considered. Turkey has also been floated, but Netanyahu has strongly rejected a Turkish presence in Gaza. So we will see. And then in his comments on Sunday, Netanyahu also insisted that Israel was a sovereign state and said that the U.S. is not telling Israel what to do or vice versa. He said, quote, when I was in Washington, people said I control the American government and I dictate its security policy. Now they claim the opposite, that the American administration controls me and dictates Israel's security policy. Neither is true, end quote. He's been having to answer questions like that quite a bit lately. All right, so the next one here, 6 killed as Israel escalates Lebanon strikes. So this article is from Jason Ditz. So throughout the weekend, Israel launched pretty heavy airstrikes in Lebanon and killed at least 6 more people. So 2 people were killed and 2 were wounded on Friday in a drone attack on the town of Toul in the Nabatea district. That's in southern Lebanon. Obviously, the IDF claimed they targeted Hezbollah, and there was no confirmation on the Lebanese side about who they killed, so we don't know. But that's just always what the IDF claims. And they're always saying that they're killing Hezbollah commanders. Like there's just an unlimited number of Hezbollah commanders walking around. in southern Lebanon. But that's, often the claim. And we saw last, I think it was Thursday, an 80-year-old woman was killed in one of these strikes. Then on Saturday, one man was killed in a strike in southern Gaza, and an Israeli drone hit a motorcycle, killing one person, and then 2 more people were killed in vehicles on Sunday. So again, they're really ramping up the attacks on Lebanon. And this is where there's another so-called ceasefire agreement that's been in effect since November, almost a year now. And Israel's, probably thousands. It's violated it thousands of times in different ways. That's both through airstrikes and even the flights. They're not supposed to be flying over southern Lebanon, and they probably do that every day. And they also have maintained the occupation of southern Lebanon with the 5 military outposts that they have down there. So just violating it in so many different ways. All right, so the next one here, Israeli tanks advance into Syria's Quneitra Governorate. So another one from Jason. So Israeli forces continue to operate in Syria's southwestern Quneitra Governorate with 2 more incursions documented on Sunday, with tanks advancing onto a highway and then setting up a checkpoint at which they detained a number of locals and seized motorcycles that attempted to pass. A second incursion was reported a few hours later further north, and Israeli military vehicles were backed by helicopters in this one. So this is just a reminder that the Israeli occupation of southwestern Syria, which started after the regime change that ousted Assad in December, Israel invaded, and this occupation continues. And, we cover this stuff because this is all funded, supported by U.S. military aid. It's not just supporting what's happening in Gaza, the horrific occupation in the West Bank, where these settler attacks are just getting worse and worse. It's also supporting this war in Lebanon and this occupation in Syria. The next one here, this is from 972 magazine. Settler terror devastates West Bank olive harvest. And we've covered some of this stuff. This is a long report about the situation on the ground for Palestinians in the West Bank during olive harvesting season. And when olive harvesting season comes, they get attacked by settlers who want to destroy their livelihood, and don't want them to be able to farm their own land and harvest their crop from their very old trees. Instead, they want to destroy the trees, cut down the trees, and hurt or kill the people who are trying to live off of them. And so they say that they've recorded 150 settler attacks in the past 2 weeks, which is a really high number. Because I know, I forget the exact numbers, but I know in 2024, there was just over, I believe, maybe around 1,100 settler attacks in the West Bank recorded in the whole year. So 150 just in 2 weeks. That's a lot. And there was that big attack that we saw that was documented by that American journalist. I believe his name is Jasper Nathaniel. He took the video of the woman getting hit in the head by an Israeli soldier with a club. So it's just really, really bad in the West Bank. All right, so the last one here, Trump wants to meet Kim on Asia tour. So this one is from Kyle Anzalone at the Libertarian Institute. So as President Donald Trump headed to Malaysia on the first leg of his Asia tour, he told the media to put out the word that he would like to meet with North Korean Supreme Leader Kim Jong-un. He said, putting out the word, I want to meet with Kim. He says that they have a lot of nuclear weapons, but not a lot of telephone service. The fact is that the U.S. and North Korea don't have diplomatic relations, so it's a little tricky to send messages, I guess. And so I would be surprised, just the way things are, if this does go down. North Korea has shown an interest in speaking with the U.S. if they don't demand denuclearization. I haven't seen Trump say that. But Trump he kind of suggested that he doesn't expect North Korea to give up its nuclear weapons. He referred to North Korea as a sort of nuclear power. He's saying, they have a lot of weapons, basically, and kind of acknowledging that they're probably not going to give them up. So it could be a potential avenue for diplomacy there. All right, that is it for the news for today. Please go check out our Viewpoints, one from Kelly Vlahos. The neocons have finally found a way into MAGA hearts. So this is a good piece from Kelly, who works over at Responsible Statecraft. This is an original article published at antiwar.com. which is cool. But it's, it's an important piece about, how the neocons are getting their regime change war, and getting MAGA to support it, which is a real shame. The next one here, Ariel Gold, a minefield in Gaza, about just the work of clearing all these unexploded bombs in Gaza. I mean, what that's going to take. One from Ramsey Baroud, The Unvanquished Will, Gaza's Triumph of Spirit Against Genocide. One from Colonel Douglas McGregor, On Ukraine and Venezuela, Trump needs to dump the sycophants. And our spotlight from George O'Neill Jr. at The American Conservative, The Small Boat Attacks Are Illegal. So please go check all that out. We have a ton of stuff in the lower part of the page, a lot of Gaza stuff about the situation on the ground for people, and stories from all over the web, the internet. Do people still call it the web these days? And you can go check out our blog. Got some other content over there. Just always stuff to read and check out at antiwar.com. But that is it for me for today. I hope everyone had a good weekend. We're coming up on, Christmas is still a long way off. I don't know why I was thinking it was close, because I'm going to take a few days off around then, but I'll remind you when it gets closer. But anyway, like, subscribe, comment, follow us on social media. I will be back tomorrow with some more news. Thanks for listening.